So, hi everybody. I'm really grateful to be here today to share with you some of the research that I've been doing in relation to my work as a policy fellow for the Light for Public Health initiative. I won't say too much about my background other than that I am very much not a scientist. My background is in philosophy, politics, law, things like this. So yeah, but I'm very interested in these questions of light and circadian rhythm and public health and so on. And that was really what led me to find out about the Light for Public Health initiative and see this policy fellow opportunity, and think that it really could be a nice bridging of my interests with the important work that's being done here. Um, and what I'm presenting today, I'm really trying to walk a bit of a tightrope between representing scientific developments as accurately as I can, and contextualizing it within developments in industry and design, and trying to figure out some promising policy directions or important regulatory questions that I think recognizing light as a environmental modifier of public health would have, sort of the broader implications of that in the level of the EU specifically is my focus. Okay, so I won't go through all of this structure in detail, but the current paper that we're working with has this structure to kind of give you a sense. And really, I won't go through a lot of this stuff in detail because this is all very well known terrain for this group and from the presentation that was just given. But just to briefly contextualize it, it seems to me that in the policy and regulatory frameworks, the understanding of light and its relationship to health primarily thinks about that relationship in a very indirect way, right? So, like, light might only affect health or it might only affect health if there's a dark environment, so someone can't see, and therefore, I don't know, trips and falls, and so there's like safety hazards, right? It's not a very direct understanding of the light health relationship that we're seeing emerge through the contemporary paradigm of research focusing on the non-image forming effects of light and broader sort of health implications of light exposure, whether it's not enough during the day or too much at night. So as I say, I won't go through that all because I think you all know that very, very well. And sort of to keep my time, to keep myself on time, I wanted to spend a little bit more of my time talking about how, in relation to this emerging scientific research, we're really seeing different kinds of responses in the space between research, industry, design, and engineering. So, for example, in Europe and the US specifically, as far as my knowledge is concerned, we really see a whole new host of products entering the market, which justify their utility and desirability precisely in relation to the non-image forming effects of light, or more broadly on the relationship between light and health. So there are lots of types of products in this space that I'm sure you've seen. And we've narrowed our focus in this particular research to maybe actual light bulbs or light systems that might be procured by, I don't know, think hospitals or care facilities, things like this. And we're looking at light systems or light products that are described as, and there are different terms here, as you know, human-centric, integrative, circadian, etc. And the umbrella term that I'll probably use for this presentation is simply circadian supportive lighting. So that's what I'm talking about, broadly construed. Now, firms will market these products as science-backed and science-based, and they will usually have their own dedicated pages on their websites describing the relationship between light and circadian rhythm. And I think it's useful to think about the kinds of claims that these firms and manufacturers are making about their products in two broad ways. I like to think about it in terms of positive claims and negative claims. So, positive claims are things like our product can facilitate alertness, improve cognitive function during the day, or that they can aid relaxation and sleep onset in the evening. Now, attached to this, there are these negative claims, and they are claims about what other products don't do, or what other products do that is either, not facilitating health, or in other ways, maybe from their perspective, is positively harmful to circadian rhythms and health. So they'll say, for example, that our products don't have flicker. Our products don't have unnatural blue light spikes. Our products won't cause eye strain, etc. And so these two claims are, for me, two sides of the same coin. So to justify circadian supportive lighting requires the consumer to be convinced that existing lighting is, at the very least, not optimally circadian supportive, or even worse, might be harming their health. So that's what the marketing teams of these firms have to do. They have to figure out a way to convince consumers that current products are in some way bad or not optimal, and that other products are better. Now, relatedly, we're also seeing the emergence, as you all know, I'm sure, of new standards in this area, which are a bit beyond my technical grasp for now, but I'm trying my best to get my head around it. Um, and these standards have become necessary largely because existing ones on light products, such as color coordinated temperature, only capture visual information, and they don't even necessarily do this very well, and are simply not proxies of biological potency and the kind of information we want if we're going to make informed decision about having light products that can support our circadian rhythms. And so this is where we've seen, of course, different proposed standards emerge. Most recently, of course, melanopic equivalent daylight illuminance, with the International Commission of Illumination having published their SI compliant metrics for in 2021. Now, with all that context in place, I'll just move on to some of the key policy considerations that I think are relevant to consider here. Now, first and foremost, there is this important area of consumer protection law, which is designed to protect the health, safety, and economic interests of consumers. Now, in the EU, one of the main ways that consumer protection is understood is through this idea that consumers need to be provided with reliable and not misleading information about products. Now, the concern for me here is that the potential for significant consumer confusion is really high in this area, even if the level of market penetration of things like integrative or circadian supportive lighting isn't quantitatively that great yet. It is a key growth driver in the lighting industry, and we can see this becoming an increasing issue the more important and the more this market grows. So to illustrate why I think this is an important issue, consider the question of how the average consumer, which is how the courts and how legal frameworks will think about consumer protection law, how the average consumer will respond when told that their existing light, indoor light, is contributing to ill health, that they should purchase an alternative one, which has this or that wavelength profile, this or that level of melanopic equivalent daylight illuminance, for the purpose of optimizing and protecting their health and their family's health and well-being. Now, given both the complexity of these claims and the fact that maybe it's still a very evolving area, as well as the ubiquity of artificial lighting, it really seems to me that consumers are not presently sufficiently protected in this market. The potential for consumer confusion is too high. The potential for misinformation is too high. So that's the first area of policy interaction that I've been thinking a lot about. The second is surrounding light labeling. Now, in the EU, this falls under the Eco Design Directive, as well as the Energy Labeling Regulation, which is a policy area largely falls under energy, climate change, and the environment rather than health. I'm sure you know these very well, but I've put up the key informational requirements that light bulbs are supposed to display on their packaging in the bullet points here. Now, there are two key points that I think are relevant to mention here from a sort of public health policy perspective. The first is that the regulation of light sources are simply legally disconnected from policies around public health. And that's a gap that I think we would like to see addressed. Second, one potential concern here is whether or not the definition of efficiency adopted in these frameworks, i.e. lumens per watt, is light color coordinated temperature, simply too disconnected from the non-image forming effects of light. So what do I mean by this? Maximizing efficiency or maximizing lumens per watt at present means maximizing visual brightness. Now, for circadian health, we care about both visual brightness or intensity as well as spectrum. But having more consumer controllability over spectrum and intensity simply will make these products less efficient on these metrics. And meeting the requirements that would be necessary to reach the levels that these emerging metrics like melanopic equivalent MEDI, reaching those sorts of levels of indoor lighting would require a lot of energy spend, essentially. So in the US, I know there's a consortium of scientists, medical practitioners, and engineers who are arguing for the creation of a new product category called the wellness bulb with a lower lumens per watt efficiency categorization. They're arguing for 45 lumens per watt, which would be, as you can see here, on the lowest ring of the EU's efficiency ladder. So the question here is there a tension between the energy efficiency regime and having sort of health supporting light fixtures? The last thing I wanted to mention is a brief comparison with food law. Now, the reason I wanted to mention this is because in the EU, there's quite an extensive regulatory regime governing health claims for food. Consumer protection law alone didn't cut it. They needed to create a whole new regime, basically. Now, the EU's approach to this is, in the literature, in the legal literature, it gets called informational, i.e., they focus on regulating the information provided to consumers in order that consumers can individually make healthy choices. However, the problem with light here is that consumers don't even have the relevant information to make such healthy choices. And this is a gap, right? This is a gap we want to see close. And for something like biologically relevant or circadian relevant or whatever terminology makes sense for you, information to be part of light labeling. Because currently, as I've mentioned before, things like CCT, things like lumen per watt, arguably aren't enough to make the right kind of choices. However, I think it's really important to note that it's really important to emphasize that we have much less control over the choices, over what light we're exposed to, than we do about the food we eat. So I think it's really important to emphasize that just providing information to consumers is insufficient. It's insufficient in the realm of food law in and of itself. It's definitely insufficient when it comes to light. There is this need for broader political and public understanding. And for me, this is one of the reasons why light ought to be recognized as an environmental modifier for public health, and for the priority to be about creating healthy light environments, of which individual consumers and having the right information, that's part of that picture, but that won't be enough. So just to bring myself to a conclusion, if light is to be recognized as an environmental determinant of health, the argument here is that there's broader legal and regulatory implications to deal with because this would interact with different regimes. I think consumer protection is unlikely to be doing enough to protect consumers in this realm. I think the light labeling regime might need a rethink, and it's only recently been changed. And the energy efficiency regime might have some problems with it if we bring it into the realm of light. And that we can't just say that consumers just need information. You know, you don't choose your office lighting environment, your hospital lighting environment, etc. Taking light for public health seriously means targeting this creation of healthy light environments. Clearly a collective project and not solvable just with information. Okay, there's a lot more to say here. Hopefully that was a bit of a comprehensible snapshot of what I've been working on, and I'm really looking forward to any questions or feedback. Thank you all so much for inviting me here today.
Thank you, Conor. Interesting presentation, and my compliments for you not being educated in this field. Yeah, to grasp, I think, really the core problems. Yeah, that the world faces with changing to better lighting, and also the different routes we could or should take to improve that. And okay, I saw one hand. We have 2 or 3 minutes for question and answers. Otherwise, we don't have enough time for the last part of the agenda. Kevin, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah. Hi, Conor. Thanks very much for that. You're really heading in the right direction. There's a couple of concerns I have about the direction. The problem with product labeling is that the challenge of good lighting and diurnal lighting is not product based, it's systems based. It's as much about the timing of light as not. And I think there's a big risk because of the lack of information in the public that if you start saying this lamp is healthier than this lamp, people are going to start buying this lamp and then using it inappropriately and making themselves sick one way or another. So I think that's a problem. On the energy issue, there is a massive problem using the lumen as the measure of light if we want to get anywhere out of the visual area. There's another potential metric that's system-based, which is LENI, Lighting Energy Numeric Indicator. And what that does is that works out the amount of energy being used for lighting over the year by floor area. It's a European metric. It's been around for over 10 years. It's little adopted. It's started to get adopted in the UK building regs, but in general, it's not adopted. But the advantage it has is it does take into account the time of exposure as well as the amount of energy at a given time. And if you've got a properly designed
it's a good point, Kevin. I really I think it's indeed an additional item that Conor could consider. It's not only about products, it's especially about the application of products. It's the total system that gives you a certain amount of healthy light or not healthy light during the daytime. And that's Kevin's second point. It's also not at a certain point in time, but it's during the whole day. You need to have the right light during the day at every time. Did I see we have time left for one last short question, and I think if Conor, it would be good if you could connect later on with Kevin and also to have a more in-depth discussion. I will connect the two of you, and also Twan, Tone. Tone, do you have
thank you. Just
comment?
And some thoughts has been very actualized here at our hospital. We'll use circadian supporting systems both for dark therapy and light therapy systems, and now we need to renew them. And then the question comes up, well, is this now medical device, or is just so it can be defined as medical device in our context for sure, but what if a whole hospital uses circadian supporting system? Is it medical device? That will have consequences for who's going to pay for this. So it's kind of a lot of questions coming up now this time. So.
Can I respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I won't be able to address everything, but thank you both so much for these comments. I completely agree, Kevin, that there's a system level problem, absolutely. Even something we've talked about is whether or not there needs to be recommendations on like appropriate uses of the products as part of the labeling, whether or not like, this setting is better if you want to promote alertness, this setting, these sorts of things. But that's still an open field. Like, there's nothing being decided on that yet. But yeah, I think that product information is one part of the jigsaw, but as you rightly say, there's a system level, and that's one of the things I was keen to emphasize, that isn't the silver bullet, but maybe it's a part of the solution, basically. And you, just Tony, a different version of this paper has a whole bit on the medical device regulations in the EU. I've thought a lot about this, and it hasn't been recognized yet as a medical device, but it could be if there's such health claims being made about it. Interestingly, if you're a medical device, you're immune from the energy efficiency regime. You can have whatever energy efficiency you want for a medical device. I guess I'm skeptical that the EU is going to allow light products and light systems to be recognized as medical devices, because then the huge implications of that. But in theory, it could be. And yeah. So yeah, okay. That's something that
Okay, so please, if you want to reach out to Conor, please do so. Okay, Ulysses?
I just wanted to, Conor, you in your presentation, and actually, it was very nice to follow yours because there's some similarities there. But yeah, when it comes to labeling of sources, when we look at food products, and I was really pleased you touched on food products. There are nutritional facts labels on any food product that we buy. Energy efficiency is only one part of the story. Maybe nutritional facts should be there for light sources as well. And we can then sort of start to break down. And actually, as a consequence of a sort of a nutritional facts type label on light sources, people will start to maybe, or the public or consumers would start to maybe better understand what makes one source better than the other. I take on board completely Kevin's point that it still doesn't mean that if you're overexposed to a light source, it could also be harmful. But at least let's try and start bringing awareness to the fact that there are differences. The cheaper the light source doesn't necessarily make it better. The more efficient it is doesn't necessarily make it better. But actually, let's put it in the context of nutrition, because light does nourish us.